Find yourself in the chronos of our world. We're very glad to have everyone today. My name is Father Alexander Lashchuk, and I am the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky Institute, and we're very glad to have with us today one of our doctoral students, Maria Ivaniv. Maria is a third-year doctoral student at our institute at the Faculty of Theology in the University of St. Michael's College, and her current research focuses on the participation of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church at the Second Vatican Council and its reception in North America. She has a research MA, an MA, and an STL degree in theology and religious studies from the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium, and a MA and STB degree in theology from the Ukrainian Catholic University. Maria was a lecturer of ecclesiology at Three Holy Hierarchs Kyiv Theological Seminary in Ukraine, a teaching assistant in the theology department at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, and served as secretary of the Patriarchal Commission for the Laity of the Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church in Lviv. Her recent publication is an article, The Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Bishops at the Second Vatican Council, the participation in the council and contribution to the discussions of conciliar documents. And this was published in Stolen Churches or Bridges to Orthodoxy, Volume 1, Historical and Theological Perspectives on the Orthodox and Eastern Catholic Dialogue. Before we start, maybe we usually start with Heavenly King, but we can't do that right now. And for many people, myself and Maria included, we haven't hit the other period yet. So I thought it would be nice to start with the end of Metropolitan Andrei, the servant of God, Metropolitan Andrei's prayer on divine wisdom, which is a lengthy prayer, but the last few lines I think are really perfect for this topic. In the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Grant us the wisdom of our Eastern rite, to hold it, to renew it, and develop it. Grant us the wisdom of the Fathers of the Holy Church and the great ecclesiastical teachers. Grant us the wisdom of your great Apostle Paul, so that I would at least understand his epistles, remember them, and know how to explain them to your people. Grant us the wisdom of your first vicar, that I may understand the designs of your divine providence that governs the church through the Roman pontiffs. Grant us the wisdom of obedience to them and to the universal church. Grant us the wisdom of church history and theology. Grant us the wisdom that I and our people lack. Grant us the wisdom of true satisfaction and true happiness. Amen. Prayers of our Father, Metropolitan Andrei the Confessor, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. And over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much. That's my great pleasure to be lecturer today and to have this great opportunity to talk to all of you. It's my first kind of lecture online through Zoom or any other kind of video taping things. So I'm a bit nervous, but I hope that I will tell you something here which you didn't know, and I will try to do this in like interesting way. As Father Lashchuk mentioned before, my research mostly is concentrating on Ukrainian Catholics and Ukrainian Catholic bishops during the Vatican Council, and now I'm working on the reception of Council by Ukrainians in North America. I still don't know where it will be, in Canada or in the US, but it's dependent on COVID and possibilities to get into archives. So why today we have Melkites and Ukrainians here mentioned in this talk, because it was interesting for me to look from broader perspective on Eastern Catholics during the council and how they were what they were doing broadly, not just one church. And because I had my PhD exams last year and I had my topic which was connected with the participation of the all Eastern Catholics in the council, so I decided to add Melkites here. And I'm not the great expert, but I will try to present as much as possible what I can today, and I will use PowerPoint presentation for that. But if host will allow me to do that, because for now I cannot do this. Maybe Father Alex will give me this possibility?
For now.
Yes, great, thank you. Yes, give me a second. Do you see my screen now? Like any reactions? Yes, okay, you see, and you see it fully, so you can see like without any, like, just a second, first time user. And now I feel myself really strange in empty room talking to myself. So I hope that I will do my best today. So participation and interest of the Melkite and Ukrainian Eastern Catholic churches at the Second Vatican Council. First of all, it's difficult to like even use names, because at that moment, Ukrainians in North America in diaspora called themselves Ukrainian Catholics. Now, church usually write about itself as the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. In Canada, and at the Institute of Andrei Sheptitsky, we use Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church. So sometimes you will see that I will just use word Ukrainians or Melkites. It's kind of my simplification, because it's like, it's difficult to explain all the time why I use this or that term here, but for your knowledge, it will be just or Melkites or Ukrainians, and mostly it will be used to the bishops who participated in the council. I will not mention laity so much, maybe in some small details about Ukrainians, just because I know more about them. And now we are, this talk will be, I will start from short description of the Second Vatican Council, what it was, when it happened, and why we are talking about that now in 21st century. So next year we will celebrate 60th anniversary of the beginning of the council, which started in 1962, and it has 4 sessions. So it was active from 1962 till 1965, and almost all Catholic bishops of the world participated in that council. It was near 2,500 bishops. So it was, as you can see from this picture, it was like huge like event for the church, and a lot of things were done during that event. There was 16 documents promulgated. Among them, there were 4 constitutions, which have a really huge impact on the church. And now, also among all of these bishops, there were some Eastern Catholic bishops. And there were just like 4% of those, that's namely 125 bishops who were Eastern Catholics. And again, now to describe who are Eastern Catholics, I will not really tell a lot today now. I will just refer you to lecture of Father Alexander Lashtuk, Eastern Churches, Latin Territories, Ecclesial Catholicity and the Notion of Diaspora, which he gave at Lumen Christi Institute, and there is a link. Maybe you can find it on internet. In his lecture, he shortly described the Eastern Catholic churches. Who are they and how they can be described, like patriarchal churches, major archiepiscopal churches, and metropolitan churches. So I will not go into details today. So if you want to know more, you can go to this lecture, and it will be interesting for you because it's about diaspora, so North America mostly in some way. So and now about our 2 churches which are mentioned today for our presentation. Those are Melkites and Ukrainian, so Melkite Greek Catholic Church and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. The sources which I used for today's presentation, there were not so much of them, but still those which are presented here, these titles are mostly books which are written by participants or about participants. So from the Ukrainian side, you can see here Ukrainian Church at the Vatican Council, written by bishop who participated in the council. It was Bishop Andriy Sapelyak, and also another book which was written by participant, but he wasn't a bishop. It was Atanasi Veliki, who was Basilian father and who was the secretary of the Eastern Commission at the council. And then another book, which is very important, the Second Vatican Council Diaries of Metropolitan Maxim Hermaniuk, who was Canadian and who did a lot for the Ukrainian Church and for the Council as well. I will mention him later as well. And from the Melkite side, I will mention a book, the Greek Melkite Church at the Council. And this book was published in French firstly a few years after the Council. And that book has all the speeches of Melkites and their papers, which they presented as a written contributions, and their speeches during that event, all these 4 years and years of preparations before the Council since 1959. And also there are diaries of Bishop Neophytus Edelby, who was participant of the Council as well. And the book on Maximus IV, who was Patriarch of Melkites at that time, and about him and his quest for autonomy during the Council. All these sources can give you a lot of information about those churches. And as you can see here, Melkites did more on this topic, because they, after the Council, immediately they published a book. They presented their ideas, and like they saved their ideas for the future. And it was easier for them in some way, because they were using French during the Council, not Latin, because Latin was official language, so all the speeches were given in Latin. And so it was easier to publish in French immediately after the Council. Unfortunately, Ukrainian bishops, they were not really into this so much. So there is no official publication of their speeches or documents which they prepared for the Council. I had opportunity to work on those documents, which I found in Acta Synodalia, the whole list of volumes which have all the speeches of the bishops. And I have a little dream, maybe one day we will publish that, but we will see later how it will go. So we have more sources on Melkites, but still have a lot of things to do for Ukrainians in this thing. Then structure of this talk will be the next one. Firstly, I will present the pre-conciliar context of both churches. Then I will present activity during the preparatory stage from 59 till 61, 62. And then later there will be activity at the Council. And then I will present the interests of those bishops and Ukrainians and Melkites at the Council. Among those will be 3 main topics. I will not go in more details because we don't have so much time, but I will talk about collegiality and papal authority, patriarchal dignity and ecumenism. And at the end, I will try to summarize somehow all of that, what I will tell you. And here you can see 2 pictures, and those I found, it was really nice found for me. It's a unique document for me and for those who are researching Vatican II. This is the official kind of passport of participant of Second Vatican Council. This is the document which belongs to Metropolitan Ambrosius Salesian, Metropolitan of Philadelphia. And on this second page, which is behind, there is written that Pope John XXIII asking those who see this document to allow the person who has this document to come to Rome without any problems, to be present in the first session of the Second Vatican Council. So you can see that it was really interesting to have these small details here. And then, pre-conciliar context of both churches. So Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Ukrainian Greco-Catholic Church, it's a church of unity with Rome, and they have their union with Rome in 1596. And since that time, they are in union with Rome, with the Pope, but they are still in saving all their traditions in their right. Melkites had their union with Rome in 1724. And since that time, they are with Pope. in communion with Pope. Both these churches have their counterparts in Orthodoxy. There's Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and also there's a church on Antioch, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, I'm not really good expert. To describe their condition before the council, I will look on different aspects. Firstly, it's an ecclesiological aspect, which is the structure of those churches before the council. Ukrainians at that moment, they were mostly church of the diaspora, because Ukraine was under the Soviet Union and the church there was persecuted, and it was forbidden and prohibited to be Catholic or Ukrainian Catholic there. So there were 3 metropolises at that moment, but there are 2 active in the diaspora. So there were Metropolia of Winnipeg and Metropolia of Philadelphia, which we have now as well. And as well as a third one was Metropolia of Lviv or Kyiv Halych now, which has its head of Asclepi. And at the same time, Melkite Church has a patriarchal status. So they were united together. There were 15 bishops in the Patriarch Maximus IV Sahid at that point. That leads us to the second moment, which is like how those bishops function together. Ukrainians at that point, before the council, it's 1961-62, they had their bishops' conference, which was conference of the Ukrainian bishops of the free world, which started its existence since 1957. And the leader of that conference was Metropolitan Maxim Hermanyuk of Winnipeg, Canada. So this conference was rather like unity of bishops, but they can present themselves, they can present their faithful, and they can stand for their faithful and their right. But this conference didn't have any juridical power. At the same time, Melkites had a synod which had juridical power and which united them in their activity before the council, which was a huge plus for them because they could do more together. Again, from political perspective, Ukrainians at that point, as I mentioned before, they didn't have their own country. All of them were migrants in different countries. It's North America, South America, Europe, Australia. And in all of these parts, they have their ecclesiological centers. At that point, Melkites, and now I will talk about Lebanon as a country. They had independent country since 1943, and in 60s, this country had more or less stable economical position, and it was developing, but it was just beginning of 60s, because later in 66, 67, there was collapse of biggest bank, and they had some kind of challenges with the Israeli-Pakistani war. So at this point, before the council, they had stability and they were united together. And then one more point is persecution of in the homeland for Ukrainians, and for Melkites, no persecution yet, because we know that there was some before that, and after, as current time, we have a lot of challenges for that church in the Middle East. And just short map to present you how looked Ukrainian church. At that point, as you can see, there are red, green, violet, orange, pink, and blue on the map. So all those places where there were Ukrainian faithful and bishops. So at that point, Ukrainians had 2 metropolises, 8 eparchies, 5 exarchates, and 1 apostolic visitator in Argentina. So they were spread around the world. There were no unity among them. So that was biggest challenge for bishops before the council. And from this perspective, I can say that before the council, Melkites were united, and it helped them to prepare themselves for the council. Ukrainians, because they started unification kind of process of creating this bishops conference just in 57th. All these years before, they just tried to develop this conference, so they were not really preparing for the council as the one body of bishops. Rather, some bishops, for example, as Hermaniuk, they were like trying to prepare by themselves. Okay, the next moment is activity during the preparatory stage, Ukrainian side. So as I mentioned before, they tried to unificate bishops together, and Hermaniuk was the person who tried to do this. So there was a creation of a conference of the Ukrainian episcopate of the Free World, which was established on February 12, 1957 in Winnipeg, and later in 1960 there were statutes of the Ukrainian Catholic Conference prepared by Hermaniuk, and they were later in 61 they were confirmed by the Commission for Eastern Churches in Rome, and those statutes describe the purpose of the conference. And as you can see, what is mentioned here, the PowerPoint, that articles number 2 and 4 of those statutes precisely emphasize that a conference exists in order to protect and the tradition, right, unity of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic bishops in diaspora, and it is not equal to a synod, so it does not have the canonical force of a law. So that conference didn't have any juridical power. Melkites had, if to compare to that. Then now I will continue with Ukrainians, and I will present who was participant of the preparatory commissions before the council. Those commissions worked before council since 1960, 61, those 2 years. And bishops who were there were not all bishops of Catholic Church, just those who were invited. They tried to prepare like drafts of the documents which can be discussed during the council itself. So from the Ukrainian side, there were Bishop Platon Korneliak, he was bishop in Germany, and Metropolitan Maxim Hermaniuk from Canada were members of the Preparatory Theological Commission, and Bishop Havriil Bukatko, who was bishop of Ukrainians in Yugoslavia in Europe, was a member of a preparatory commission for the apostolate of the laity. Then Bishop Konstantin Bohachevsky, Metropolitan of Philadelphia at that point, and Ivan Buchko, Bishop from Europe, they were members of the Preparatory Commission for the Oriental Churches. And Atanasi Veliki, who was Basilian monk, was an expert and secretary of that commission, and Father Meleti Wojnar, who was Basilian as well, also was the expert at the same commission. So bishops were active, and experts, they can just help. They didn't have any official voice, except Veliki as a secretary of the commission could do a lot of things. Then second thing, it's an activity of Melkites during the preparatory stage, and they were more active because even like half year of after the annunciation of the council by Pope John XXIII, Melkites had a synod at Ein Tras on August 24 to 29, 1959, and they prepared collective letter to Cardinal Tardini, dated on August 29th of that year, and it was signed by the Patriarch, 15 bishops, and the 4 superiors general of monastic orders. And then later they prepared a letter to the Pope with 2 notes, a reconciliation with the Orthodox, and the questions to be submitted to the Council. There were 19 questions formed into 4 groups, which were dogmatic, pastoral, liturgical, and questions of discipline. This move of Melkites was really important because they started to present Eastern churches and Eastern perspective on the church before the council, and giving the advices to Pope and to those who were preparing the the council what can be useful for them and what is important to people, their people in Eastern Catholic churches, and in general. So I mentioned here the 4 groups, and I will just mention briefly which questions were in one question from each of these groups. So dogmatic group has a question about that Catholic Church has easier perspective on the matter of communicatio in sacris. In all cases where doing so would not necessarily involve the denial of Catholic truth or scandal for Christians. So they were like thirsty for unity. So one of the first things was they wanted to be in union, and they wanted to celebrate divine liturgy together with the Orthodox brethren. Then pastoral perspective, they were talking about the revision of methods of apostolate and reestablish contact with the youth and workers and developing Catholic action. So practical activity in the church. Then liturgical questions, one of those was that they had hope that liturgical prayers and ceremonies will remain as faithful as possible to the tradition of the fathers, and also will be done in language of the people. So they were trying to propose the council, which actually was done after that, translation of the gospel into vernacular and also all the liturgies. So those propositions were before the council. And the last, that was the question of discipline. They asked about the revision of the Code of Eastern Canon Law, which happened but later in 90s, and also a reform of the Roman Curia, which was important because they wanted more diverse participant of the Roman Curia, and also it would help to prevent the Latinization of the Eastern by poorly informed Western participants. And also one of these moments before the council by Melkites, they were strongly for live languages. So vernacular was really important for them. And before the council, Maximus the fourth wrote a letter to Pope in February 1961, where he mentioned that to accept the Latin, the use of the few other modern languages should be added. And also he asked to install a system of simultaneous translation, not only for the use of the official non-Catholic observers, but also for the benefit of the fathers of the council. Because he was aware that like bishops who were living around the world in different countries, like South America, Asia, they were like not very well trained in Latin to freely express themselves. So that systems were installed, but they were mostly for non-Catholic observers who were like Protestants and Orthodox. And bishops still had to speak in Latin, except Maximus. In his first speech, he was against it, he spoke in French. And it was kind of big rebellion because it showed the real situation and tried to put the Latin Church out the past. Then next, we are moving to those who participated in these preparatory commissions. So Patriarch Maximus was a member of the Central Commission, and then Neophytos Edelby, Athanasius Hage, and Maurice Blondil participated in the Eastern Commission, and Philip Naba participated in the Commission on Bishops. This is again preparatory stage that mentioned before 62 when Council started itself. Now you can see Melkites with Pope John 23rd during the council. Probably it was during the first session because Pope died after the first session. There were not so much of them, but they were really active. Now I will start to talk about the participation in the work of the council by Melkites. And here in this part, I will just describe who was there and what they did in which commissions. I will go into details of the topics and their interests after that. Patriarch Maximus IV and Neophytos Adelby were members of the Commission for the Oriental Churches. And that's what I could find. Maybe some of those who are here know more about participants in other commissions, but what I can say that because of the Melkites worked together, Maximus often was the voice of his church at the council, and so therefore he had the greatest number of intervention at the council, and it was kind of good because his position as a leader always like helped him to present fully perspective of his whole church, and these ideas were not disseminated among the a lot of bishops. Also, Archbishop Elias Zogby, Neophytos Adelby, Peter Medavar, and Joseph Tawil were active participants who took stage at the council a lot of times, and they presented Eastern perspective at the council with a strong voice. Also, I will mention here Archimandrite Oreste Kerame, who thought he was not a bishop, therefore he wasn't participant of the council, but he was great theologian who inspired, and he was a great source for Melkites during the council, and he was the person who inspired a lot them. So now I will shortly present you documents to which contributed Melkites. They were mostly Firstly, I underlined the ecclesiological documents, as I called them. Those are Lumen Gentium. This is Constitution on Church, Decree Unitatis Redintegratio. It's a decree on the ecumenism, and Orientalium Ecclesiarum. It's a decree on the Eastern Catholic churches. Also, Melkites, they contributed to other documents and discussions on other documents. Among those were Constitution Sacrosanctum Concilium. This is Constitution of Liturgy. Dei Verbum, this is Constitution of the Revelation and the Word of God, and also Gaudium et Spes. This the Constitution is about the Church in the nowadays world, which is really important, and the only one written in French, not in Latin. And Decrees Christus Dominus, Presbyterium Ordnis, Apostolicum Ecclesiatatem, and Ad Gentes. Those are decrees about the bishops, priests, laity, and also the work and activity with non-Christians and missions. And here now you can see Ukrainian bishops at the council. This is the picture from the fourth session of the council. So you can see Slipei present at this picture. Now about their participation in the work of the council. So shortly speaking, Metropolitan Ambrose Seneshan of Philadelphia and Bishop Gavril Bukatko, Ivan Buchko, Andrei Sapelyak from Argentina were members of Commission for the Oriental Churches. Metropolitan Slipei later was with them together by the voice of Pope Paul VI. Archimandrite Atanasi Veliki was the secretary, and Melechi Voiner and Mikhail Hrencheshin, those monks, they were monks, were periti. Periti means experts in Latin, and Metropolitan Maxim Harmoniuk was elected as a member of the Secretariat for the Promoting of Christian Unity, and he worked there fruitfully. And there, during the council, Ukrainians spoke on different topics. Among those were, as I mentioned before, documents Lumen Gentium, Unitatis Redintegratio, and Orientalium Ecclesiarum. It's a church, ecumenism, and Eastern churches, and also documents Sacrosanctum Concilium, Gaudium et Spes on the liturgy and church in the nowadays world, and also degree on the pastoral office of bishops Christus Dominus. I will add here that because of Ukrainian bishops, they were not so united during the council as well. Not all of them were active. Some of them never spoke at the council. For example, Platon Korneliak, or bishop from Australia, Ivan Prashko, and they were criticized by some Ukrainian priests and theologians because they didn't overcome all the challenges which they had as among themselves. They didn't reach unity. therefore they couldn't fully participate in the council and to be, as Melkites, were voice of the East fully. Then now here I will shortly mention about two leaders and their goals during the council. Here you can see Metropolitan Cardinal Joseph Slipey and Patriarch also Cardinal Maximus IV Sahid. And both of them were strong leaders who were leading their bishops, but they had some different goals, and the different challenges were against them. So Slipey returned to the council in 1963, and he was during the council. His goal was to promote Ukrainian patriarchate and unite Ukrainian bishops in Ukrainian faithful outside of the Ukraine at that point. So his goals were goals inner for his own church. He was talking on the also questions of religious freedom and ecumenism and also other topics, but he had some other things to do after he returned from Siberia. He was trying to get his time back, and therefore he was a great figure at the council, but he didn't add much to the council as other bishops. At the same time, Patriarch Sahid, he was a leader fully. He was head of the synod. He presented opinion of the whole church, and because they had their patriarchate, they were united. They didn't had all these struggles among themselves. They could talk and think in a broader way, and they could add their loud voice as the Eastern Church to the council. Therefore, as Robert Taft, the really famous theologian, said that not only Melkites could present East fully at the council, unfortunately not Ukrainians with them because of the disunity and persecutions. I mentioned this just to show you those who were main faces of those churches during the council. Now I'm slowly moving to the description of three themes or interests which those churches had during the council. And first of that, those are collegiality and papal authority. And firstly, I will mention Metropolitan Maxim Hermaniuk, who was kind of really active participant of the council. He had a lot of speeches. Ukrainians generally had near 30 speeches, and he had probably more than half of them. So he was really active, and he presented his view on collegiality even before the council. In 1962, when he still was participant of the preparatory commission, and at that point he already talked about collegiality and apostolic council. And here's his quotation from his diaries: "The apostolic council would represent in a practical way the power of all the bishops under the supervision of the Pope. The collegial power of the entire episcopate would be real, exercised concretely." What is collegiality? To describe broader context, that is a notion which was developed and more broadly presented during the council, which presented that College of Bishops, or all the bishops, can create a college of bishops around the Pope, and they can govern the universal church with Pope. Before that, there was a strongly presented hierarchical pyramid, with the Pope as the head and bishops which depended from him and depended on him. So, and the council tried to change the system more closely to the Eastern perspective of the church, when there is a synod of bishops or council of bishops together with the Pope as their head, and they lead the church together. And because of that, Hermaniuk also criticized the frequent usage of phrases such as the College of Bishops together with its head Roman Pontiff, and all bishops together with the Pope, because in his perspective, Pope is a part of the college. He just work as a head. So this was kind of a little revolution during the council, because they tried to introduce new perspective at the church, not as a just pyramid, but as a society which can be governed but together. And for him, it was important to emphasize the power of the bishops on both the universal and the particular levels. He also supported the idea that the apostolic power is given to bishops in ordination when they became a part of the College of Bishops. So before that, there was an idea that bishops received their power from Pope, but Hermaniuk stressed that it's given them during their ordination. And also he presented during the council, he presented the definition of the College of Bishops, and he said that such a college is both the visible sign and an efficacious sign of the true Catholicity of the Church of Christ, since the College is representative for all people and come from all languages and the entire Christian world. So College of Bishops together with Pope for him was something great representation of the whole church. And now I will just briefly add that Slipei, in one of his speeches, mentioned was against this idea, because he didn't see that this college may have any juridical power as a synod has. So he was against this idea. But it's interesting to add that at the same time, he tried to convert the Ukrainian Bishops' Conference into Ukrainian Synod of Bishops, which was prohibited by Rome at that point, and it was allowed just during the pontificate on John Paul II in 1980. So it was interesting that in his own world, he was for the synod for his bishops, but on the general level, he was against it. And I found a comment of Yves Congar on that, this quotation which you see here. And Congar said that it was strong Latin lesson for the council. So Slipei presented here really conservative perspective on the church at that time. And now I will move to the Melkites and their ideas on the papal authority and collegiality. And Maximus spoke about Synod of Bishops and papal authority in his one of his speeches. In first speech, he presented these 5 points about papal authority, and as you can see, he was underlying that only the Jesus Christ is the head of the church, so it's inappropriate to give the Pope this title. Also, Pope is the head of the Apostolic College, and it's part of it. Here's the he's the head and the part of the body, but not outside of it. The Pope and the College of Bishops have power over the church, and one does not destroy the other. Also, the power of the Pope does not substitute the power of the local bishop. The power given to Peter and then succeeded by the Pope is personal and pastoral in its nature and cannot be delegated, and some law and rights of the Roman Church cannot be transferred to the universal church. So here, Maximus and as Maxim Hermaniuk before tried to separate Pope as a head of the Roman Church, as a bishop of the Roman Church, from the Pope as a head of the Episcopal College. And he tried to also present that the power of bishops is strong enough to be a power presented on the universal level, not just on local levels where those bishops are put. And also he wrote about the Synod of Bishops, and he mentioned the importance of these questions and gave examples of those roots in scriptures and tradition of the Eastern Fathers and Fathers in general. And as well as Hermaniuk did, he presented biblical roots of collegiality from the New Testament. And in his speech in 1963, he proposed creation of the College of Bishops to support the Pope in the governing of the Church. The Roman Curia, in his opinion, cannot do this. As a small remark here, I will mention that the last session of the Council in 1965, Pope Paul VI announced that he will create a Synod of Bishops, which actually is gathering till today. Like in recent years, there were some synods as well, but the thing was tricky moment in all of that was that Paul VI limited the power of that Synod of Bishops. So they didn't have yet that juridical power as Maximus IV and Maxim Hermaniuk were pleading for. And now I will move to the second topic, patriarchal dignity. That topic was really important for both churches. For Melkites, it was important to get their dignity back. So before the council, they sent a letter to the Pope with request to return Eastern Patriarchs their proper rank among the Catholic hierarchy, and because cardinals received higher rank and places than patriarchs. Why it was written like that? Because at that point of time, and in some way now, cardinals during the council even, they were sitting closer to the Pope than Eastern patriarchs. And Maximus, knowing his own dignity, was writing to Pope, and later you can see in 1963 they sent memorandum to Rome that their dignity is higher than dignity of cardinals who are just bishops in Roman Catholic Church. And they received this confirmation. So since the second session of the council in 1963, they were sitting in front, near the cardinals, and they were like, whole the council for Melkites were like trying to return their dignity, that they can do and present themselves, and they are not lower than cardinals, who are just part of Roman Church, and only one person can be higher than patriarchs of the East, the Pope of Rome. And then it's interesting because in 1965, Maximus IV, as well as Metropolitan Joseph Slipei, received dignity of cardinalate. And Maximus didn't want to receive that, but at the end he received this dignity. And here is a quotation which he mentioned during his speech in the cathedral in Beirut, a month or two after that. During that speech, he explained why he received this dignity, and as for the cardinalate, we consider it as additional responsibility given to us for the good of the universal church. That is why we do not see the cardinalate as a promotion in the strict sense of the word. We were and we remain above all the patriarch of our patriarchal sees. To this primary and fundamental dignity, we shall add the title of cardinal, indicated an additional and independent responsibility that we assume in the Council of His Holiness the Pope and in the Roman dicastories. So for him, it was additional responsibility, not something which he received as some higher rank. It's interesting to add that Ukrainians who were really happy because Slipei also received this dignity, were thinking that he received higher dignity. So perception of mentality was a bit different of, for example, I know about lay people, Ukrainians, and hierarch of Melkites, because he really understood his position as a patriarch, and that is really high dignity for him. Then moving to Ukrainian perspective and fight for patriarchal dignity, Slipi was a great promoter of this idea of patriarchal dignity for Ukrainians. And in his first speech in 1963, in October, he pleaded for the creation of such a patriarchate. And that was the beginning of the long way on which this church is still now to receiving this dignity of patriarchate. And the main reason for that later was the document Orientalium Ecclesiarum, which I mentioned earlier, on the Eastern Catholic churches, which said that at that point, our church was the church of Slipi, had the title of Major Archbishop. And that document said that Major Archbishop and Patriarch has the same rights. So Ukrainians hierarchy, almost everyone among the bishops and laity thought that that is the moment when we can receive it. But the challenge was that Ukrainian church didn't have its theory at that point, and Rome didn't respond to that. Even there was created a Ukrainian patriarchal movement, which is active till now as well. And they had a lot of activities in 60s and 70s to promote this idea, and they were writing like thousands of letters to Rome, but still they're on the way to this. And another moment which mentions Slipi in context of patriarchal dignity was Latinization. And on October 16, 1964, Metropolitan Slipi made an intervention on the decree Orientalium Ecclesiarum. He condemned the process of Latinization in the Eastern churches and stressed the Eastern churches had suffered and had to deplore heavy losses as a result of this process from the Western churches, Western bishops, and Western missionaries. And here's his quotation from that speech. The Eastern churches have lost many of their faithful, though the negligence of Western Catholics who tried to drag to the Latin Rite faithful of the Eastern Catholic churches are Orthodox. For this, they use the social benefit of the currently prevailing Latin Rite. By such behavior, they have done a very bad service to the Catholicity of the Church. And in one of his speeches, he also had a plea that like Latin bishops had to stop to do such a thing because they will just kill these Eastern churches. The same mention of Latinization was done by Maximus in his other speeches. And here I shortly will present Bishop Volodymyr Valanchuk. He was Ukrainian bishop in France. And he also talked about the dignity of patriarchate and dignity of Ukraine, of Eastern Catholic churches. And he didn't have a speech, but he presented paper to one of the commissions where he answered on few complaints of some conciliar fathers. And here is a quotation of those complaints. And one of the complaints were that some Eastern Catholic churches, that have a dubious origin and are imbued with the spirit of proselytism. So that was really harmful for him, because that's kind of underlined that these churches cannot exist at that point of time. So here is his quotations. It's really powerful and kind of full of emotion quotations against this phrase of one of the participants of the council. So it seems not so noble and generous on the part of Catholics to despise the united churches and consider them like a blame on the mystical body of Christ, and desire instead that they may have disappeared or returned to the bosom of the Orthodox churches. In order, as they say, to facilitate the ecumenical dialogue, precisely those churches survived such a great difficulties to become Catholic, and had so many martyrs as a testimony of the Catholicity of Christ's Church. So many of these churches have suffered difficulties and persecutions in order to remain in Eastern faith and tradition, despite the existence of pressure, both from within and from outside. So this present kind of situation in which were Uniate churches, as they can be called, or Eastern Catholic churches, who were and still are in between Orthodox and Catholics, who are big in ecumenical dialogue, and they try to like present themselves as a bigger than Eastern churches, who are at the same time Eastern and in with union with Rome. So now we are moving. I will try to finish faster because I'm running out of time. On the third moment, which I mentioned, is ecumenism. And here I will present shortly ideas of Metropolitan Maxim Hermaniuk, and he was active as a member of Secretary for the Promotion of Christian Unity. He took part in drafting the third chapter of the decree Unitatis Redintegratio on ecumenism. In one of his speeches, he presented an idea of the creation of the special dual theological commission for dialogue with Orthodox and Protestants. And as we know now, a lot of such commissions are active and working on different levels. Also, bishops stressed the conditions of the Eastern Catholic churches, which could show the Orthodox that unity with the Roman See had a positive influence on their development. So that was like, we have to be in better position so they will see that it's good to be together with Rome. This is perspective presented from the point of view that Orthodox should be reunited with Rome. It's not the perspective that two equal brethren will again talk after long separation. It's kind of perspective of the ecumenism from the Latin Church in some way. Also, he was trying to promote a dialogue with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Canada, and he tried to bring observers of that church at the council, but it was difficult because Bishop didn't agree on that. But that was one of his like great activities, unfortunately not so fruitful. And now again, I will mention Bishop Volodymyr Malanchuk, Ukrainian, who was talking about wall between the churches. There was a quotation in the document Unitatis Redintegratio 18 about the wall which separates two churches. And he speaks about that wall in his short paper, and he presents three obstacles which are part of that wall. And in his opinion, this is political motives, religious particularism, and self-sufficiency of the participants or those churches who are on different sides of that wall. And what he means by political motives, that political parties and state of the churches which are part of the dialogue or part of separation, they are pushing churches to stay and don't like really be active in the dialogue because it will influence the state. So still we are talking about 60s because situation was difficult and some states were like pressuring church, and church was really dependent on the state, from the state. The second is religious particularism. It's active as well now that church really try assimilate with the state, and if state and another state have some conflict or war, it looks like the churches have they have conflict as well. You can see now this on Ukrainian and Russian situation with the war on the east side of the Ukraine, and we can see that churches are also in war, and it should be like that because church should search unity, not be too close to the state. And third part is a self-sufficiency, that each part of the dialogue, each church thinks that they know everything, they're the smartest, they have all the traditions, and they knows everything. So that is again one big obstacle to dialogue. And I think that this is really interesting and deep analysis from his perspective, because he's looking not from outside but from inside of the situation. And he also his quotation about the Eastern Catholics and their role in this dialogue and breaking of this wall. Now we Eastern Catholics intend to eliminate wholeheartedly and sincerely, with the assistance of God's grace, those motives, the wall that separates us from our separated brethren. We want to do this by recognizing everything positive, human, and Christian, what their inheritance contains, and by making efforts on our part to show them by our spiritual renewal the impeccable and unblemished Catholic Church, the true Church of Christ. So this is his perspective on the role of Eastern Catholics in ecumenical dialogue. And then Bishop Maximus IV, in his document from 61, talking about the local experience of with Orthodox people and priests in the Middle East. And he, in these two quotations, he says that Orthodox people are really open, and they saw this council, the main goal of this council, as a unity of the churches, because, and also was difficult for them because they had to struggle with the Muslims and the same territory. So united Christians are more powerful than they if they are separated on that territory. At the same time, clergy was not so open for that, because they saw that Rome and Roman Church think about itself as a bigger brother, and they didn't think it that way. So they were struggling with this idea of unity. And then here you can see a picture of Archbishop Neophytos Edelby with the Bishop Antoni Surski. They had little like presentation in 65 in London. You can see a picture from there, and they're doing that in his paper. Bishop Edelby has a phrase that by the very fact of the re-establishment of unity, we shall disappear as the entities. This quotation underlines his perspective that Eastern Catholic churches have to return to their roots and became part of the Orthodoxy. So there will be no need or no like kind of perspective of being in between when unity will be achieved. Then I will present one more idea from the Melkites perspective. This is a book of Archbishop Elias Zogby. We are all schismatics, but it's maybe incorrect translation from French in which it was published. It should be rather like, are we all schismatics? And he has idea of double communion of Melkite Church with Rome and with Orthodox churches. So he was thinking like, we didn't like disagree with both parties, so we can have community with both sides and be in between. And he developed this idea and published the book in 95-96, and there was even signed a declaration in 1995 by bishops, but actually it didn't go further because it's kind of makes a lot of complications. But for me it was interesting idea, because in some way Ukrainian church after the 1054 was in this position. They were in unity with Rome and Constantinople, but that was disappearing. It disappeared through the ages later. And generally speaking, that's all what I wanted to tell you. Here is a picture which I found in one of the archives when Melkite bishops trying to look at the Mitra of Ukrainian Metropolitan Synod. And the question maybe from you can be, did they have some common activities, Melkites and Ukrainians? Yes, except looking at each other's heads. They had common meetings during the first session of the council in 1962. Each week, but after this return of Slipei and some changes in Ukrainian activity, there were no more like every week's meeting between Ukrainians and Melkites. And to summarize my sometimes too broad speech, I will say that both churches, Ukrainian and Melkite Church, were active in different ways, and their context and background influenced a lot what they did during the council. And because of that, Ukrainians were more concentrated on themselves because they tried to develop structures and like tried to like save themselves and survive in the diaspora situation. And Melkites were more like more active and they were louder. And at the end, I will have a quote of Father Miroslav Tatarin, which for me presents the like perspective on Eastern churches after the council. The council sparkled to life the sleeping giants that are the Eastern Catholic churches. They are no longer silent members of the Catholic Church. These churches are claiming a heritage, rights, and responsibilities rooted in the ancient church that gave birth to the Catholic Church of today. They are demonstrating the Church's apostolic legacy of being a communion of churches. Therefore, they are embodying two central features of the Council: ressourcement and aggiornamento. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. We're going to have a few minutes for questions. She's agreed to take some questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box and I'll read it out to her and then she can graciously answer it. So, okay, so first question from Daniel Galadza, who thanks you for your fascinating talk. There's a question regarding your introduction, comparing the political context of both churches, Melkite and Ukrainian, and the question of persecution, national independence. Could you say more about the Melkites' relations with local political powers in Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Israel, Palestine, before and after the Second Vatican Council, or maybe recommend a work for further reading?
Thank you for the question. And unfortunately, I'm not a great expert in Melkite's question. What I presented here is like general knowledge. I now don't have any access to any library to search for books which can help you with this question. Just generally speaking, I know that at that moment, those countries had some kind of stable economic situation. And for example, Lebanon just received its independence from France in 1943, and they had like economic development. So that had some stability in the region, which ended at the end of 1960s. So before that and after that, there were like Second World War, as you know, and after that there was like Palestinian war and Israel-Palestine war, which influenced the council as well, influenced the region because Lebanon received a lot of Palestinian refugees and Israel took part of the territory of Lebanon. So things started to be complicated at the end of 60s. But unfortunately, if I will find something, I will send you, but like unfortunately, I don't know.
A second question from Deacon Daniel. You mentioned Latinization discussed by Patriarch Joseph Slipe at the council. I have read of Melkites complaining of Byzantinization of their church. Have you come across this term or view among the Melkites in your research on the council?
Thank you again. I guess I heard that you mentioned that thing about Byzantinization when I talk with you someday. I didn't find it in speeches because that was kind of not really maybe appropriate for them because they would complain on themselves, on Eastern Catholics, other as Eastern Catholics. So on that big, in some way, Latin Council, they were presenting what they're fighting with on this level. So I didn't find, maybe I will find when I will search again for some my research and I will let you know, but they also were mentioning Latinization in their context, but their context was a bit different because they were like in an Arab area and they were, Melkites are Byzantine Catholics, but they use Arab language as one of their languages. So probably you can speak about Byzantinization. Thank you.
Question from Liam. A main crux in the second half of your paper seems to be that Eastern Catholic churches are stuck between Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Do you think this is somewhat ecclesiastically problematic and that we need to adopt a new way of doing ecumenical dialogue with the Orthodox that stresses the main divide between Catholic and Orthodox as opposed to Eastern and Western or liturgy?
Thank you for an interesting question, Liam. In some way, they are stuck in between, but at the same time, there is some privilege of being in between, because Eastern churches can see both sides of the story, and they are Eastern in their prayer, their rite, their heritage. They are in unity with Rome. They have Roman education, some bishops and laity. They use all the dogmatic theology of both sides, Eastern and Western. It's difficult to say about ecumenical dialogue then and now because it's two different stories. It's developed a lot since the 60s and 70s. The challenge is more from the perspective of Orthodox churches, because they think that we don't have any right to exist because we just those who left them and suddenly became Roman. But Ukrainian Catholics, for example, they think that they try to present how unity can looks like, as I mentioned from one of the bishops. But at the same time, some of the Melkites, I didn't mention that, had idea and presented that Eastern Catholics, they are just Orthodox in union with Rome. So that's not a problem because we are Orthodox in all our prayer and belief. And if you will look closer on all the challenges, which are dogmatic challenges, they can be overcome. Like you can overcome them just from the human perspective. Like the positions of power of East and West are too strong now, I guess, centralized on themselves to think maybe it's not time, time doesn't come yet to be united. I'm not sure that I answered on your question because I didn't write it fast enough, but if you have it more, you can write me. Thank you.
Okay, a question from Talia Zayats. Thank you so much for your talk. Perhaps you've not had the opportunity to go into archives, but is there evidence of informal interaction or discussion around the council among Ukrainian and Melkite participants? I'm thinking of so-called soft diplomatic interactions like dinners or social meetings, or on the contrary, do we only have documentation about official discussions?
Thank you for the question. It's really interesting question. I had actually opportunity to go to the Philadelphia archive because Metropolitan Boris Gudiak was kind enough to open archives for me. I didn't find those documents which you're talking about, but what I can say, during the council, there were few bars, coffee bars at the council. So among those sessions, bishops going outside, they had their coffee, they talk with each other. There were like dinners, as you mentioned, each bishops conference at that moment, like Americans, Canadians, they had some kind of dinners for bishops whom they invited. They were common things. So they had opportunity to talk with each other unofficially and in just inner talks, but I didn't find yet any evidence of those in maybe there is something, but not so much in diaries of Metropolitan Maxim Hermaniuk and Bishop Neophytos Edelby, but there, you really have to search in those diaries really concretely, but official documents I didn't see. So maybe still things to search for. Thank you for the idea.
Question from Nicholas Mataya. Thank you for your talk. Question. In your discussion of Latinization, the quote from Metropolitan Slipe seemed to be less what we normally call Latinization today and more about church poaching. Sorry, I can't think of a better word. Is that the case?
Thank you for the question. In some way, maybe yes, maybe no, because the challenge of Latinization was from Slipe's perspective that, for example, North America and faithful in Canada and the United States, Ukrainian faithful, they came as the workers at the end of 19th century, and they didn't have their own bishop until like beginning of the 20th century. And at that point of time, Roman Catholic bishops didn't really want to deal with them. They didn't understand them. Different language, different prayer, some strange people. And that challenge was because they wanted to convert them into Latin Rite. That's one of the challenges which Slippy mentioned. And another one was like going behind to Ukraine-Poland situation, when it was more like you had more power when you was Roman Catholic than Ukrainian Catholic at the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century of the theater of Western Ukraine. And then a lot of like another thing about Latinization, what we can name as a Latinization is a like Latin practices entered Western tradition, Eastern tradition, sorry. So like Rosary, the Way of the Cross, and other, which we know that which are actually part of some Eastern traditions as a normal, which were not before that time. I can agree with your perspective in some way. Maybe I will not call it in that way, but there were some struggles like on the basis of power at that time. Just who belongs to whom, who is stronger. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you for the talk from Susan. When we see mid-20th century Eastern churches in contemporary style, especially the 60s and 70s, do we understand this as a trend towards modernism, or is that Latinization?
I don't fully understand the question. So how development was changed since 60s till now in those churches? Yes.
No, maybe like how do we distinguish between maybe organic growth towards modernity or what is Latinization? Is that the same thing? Are those different things? How do they coexist?
I would not say that these churches they were against modernity in some way because they tried to preserve their rights and traditions and to save language, save their way of prayer. Until now it happens as well. So they're like going against it. About Latinization, I'm not sure that it's still now so important. It's important on the question of prayer because if, for example, as I know from Ukrainian perspective, we're still trying to have our official like liturgical texts or official like prayer books and other things. And to do all of that, you have to find the old origins and to move aside all what collected on the top of all of that during the centuries when churches were strongly dependent from Rome and from Rome like positions and directions. So I'm still hesitating with this question. Maybe Susan can write me later separately and I will answer her. Thank you.
Father John, a Melkite priest in Texas. Is there, in your opinion, a correlation between the Melkites' insistence on the vernacular in Vatican II and details of the circumstances with the Greek ethnic and idiom Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch in the 17th century?
Can I see the question again? Because I didn't follow correctly. Sorry.
If you click the chat box, you'll see it there.
Yeah, I just found it. I'm not really familiar with the context of 17th century of Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch. So like I'm not an expert. Sorry that I didn't know enough and don't know enough, Father John, but the vernacular for Melkites was really important from the moment where they were, because they were in the Middle East. There are a lot of languages, and they saw that they had a French as an official at that point in the country. They used Arab. They were Byzantine Church. They were part of with the Latin Church. Again, there are a lot of languages, and some of their faithful already moved as a diaspora to North America. So they really saw challenge, and they saw that it should be like simplified the question of vernacular. So maybe that was behind that insistence. And I, unfortunately, sorry, I cannot like answer fully on your question, but thank you for that.
Next question from Father Bogdanceli. Father Dr. He'll only put one doctor, Dr. Petro Bileniuk, would often say we had a chance to declare our Ukrainian patriarchate before Vatican II, and would define how it could be promulgated. What do you think?
Bileniuk was a great activist during the patriarchal movement after Vatican II. He wrote a lot. He was a part of the movement. The ideas about Ukrainian patriarchate was like they are originated even since the 17th century. Originally in Ukraine, where Catholic and Orthodox bishops tried to sit together and think about the unity and one patriarchal church on the Ukrainian territory at that time, but political reasons